So hello and welcome to the Poet's Voice recording series sponsored by Black Moss Press. My name is Julienne Rousseau and I am very excited to be here alongside three very talented Canadian poets. But I would like to give a warm welcome to our very first live Zoom audience. So thank you everyone for being here tonight. So to begin, I'd like to introduce our three guest speakers. Okay, first, Richard M. Grove, otherwise known to his friends as Ty, is a poet, a writer, an editor, photographer, the publisher of Hidden Brook Press, and president of the Canada-Cuba Literary Alliance. Richard has 20 titles of poetry, fiction, and memoir, including In Search of Cuba, published with Sandcrab Books in 2020. And today he joins us from Scarborough to share his book called Cuba's Blue Sky in My Pocket, published with Black Moss Press. Please welcome Richard Grove.
Thanks very much, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I have, I'll start with three thank yous. Julian, thanks very much for hosting and taking care of us authors all the way through the process. And Marty, thanks so much for being so bold as to publish my book with Black Moss Press. I'm proud to now be a Black Moss Press author. And least and not least last but not least is John B. Lee. Thank you very much for being the editor of this book. I'm glad that you put a phone book underneath you so that you're now raised up a little bit. The focus of this book is primarily about Cuba. My darling wife Kim and I have been going to Cuba for almost 30 years, and sometimes for extended lengths of time, 2 or 3 months, and we've gotten to know a lot of Cubans. We've made some very dear friends. I have read and taught different places across the country at different universities and had an absolutely wonderful time. So this is my first official poetry book, although I have written a couple of memoirs about traveling, I think 3 memoirs about traveling in Cuba, and each of those have poems in them. But this anthology was absolutely wonderful to put together, and I'm going to start by reading 3 fairly short poems. And the reason that I chose these poems and put them in this order is because they are all slightly political in tone. The first one is titled Bully, and it has an overt overtone of the U.S. Bullying Cuba all the way for decades, and certainly since the embargo has hit Cuba by the United States. And the latter 2 poems are kind of inadvertently political in that they allude to the scarcity of products and supplies in Cuba, and that is all political tone in Cuba because of the embargo. Right now the embargo is on and still heavy. Cuba has enough vaccine to vaccinate the entire population from one end of the island to the other, but because of the embargo, there's not enough vaccines to, or pardon me, not enough syringes to inoculate everybody. So there are people on without their shot. So it's not surprising that that politics slips into my Cuba poems. The first one is titled Bully, and it's fairly overt. The big bully down the street keeps throwing stones. Some of them hit, and hit hard. Friends stand, watch, and duck the stones that hit and harm their neighbors.
Thank you, Richard.
The next two poems are also fairly short, and they comment really just a small amount on the supply of goods in Cuba. This first poem is his Sistine Chapel ceiling. A paint-speckled Cuban man stretches to the ceiling of our restaurant, teetering, one tippy toe on a chair, one on the counter, reaching, stretching, lean, long limbs, doing the best job he can with his decade-old stubbly brush that holds little paint. The next short poem is kind of a funny one because I was in a department store in Cuba, and there were, of course, people hustling and bustling around, and there was this woman wearing toilet paper curlers, and I'm sorry if that gives away the poem, but makeshift curlers. A proud Cuban woman weaves through department store aisles, necessities plunk into basket. Cardboard toilet paper rolls, makeshift curlers furrow her black hair. So that's just a good start to my Cuba poems. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Richard. And next I'm going to turn things over to John. So let me give John an introduction. John B. Lee is a Canadian author and poet. John has had more than 70 books published to date, and at least 10 of those were published with Black Moss Press. And he is the editor of 7 anthologies. His work has appeared internationally in over 500 publications and has been translated into French, Spanish, Korean, and Chinese. And he has received more than 60 prestigious international awards for poetry. Today, John is joining us from Port Dover to share his latest book, published with Black Moss Press, called Something Else. Please welcome John B. Lee. John,
thank you very much.
You're welcome. And if you would like to give us a quick introduction about your book and possibly read us a poem, that would be wonderful.
The book is called Something Else, and it was published by Black Moss Press. And I'd like to thank you, Julienne, for hosting this. And what an honor it is to read with both Richard and Marty. I'm going to read a poem that follows nicely from the poems that Richard read, because the central character of this poem is a Cuban ophthalmologist who studied Portuguese and ended up being a doctor in a remote region of the Amazon in South America. And I think the poem is self-explanatory. And the title of the poem is What Means Tomorrow? My friend, Victor Manuel, the uncommonly handsome Cuban doctor, administers to the people living in the most remote regions of Brazil, dwelling deep in the rainforests of Amazon, where he says to the sick in his own third language, "Come back tomorrow." He learned Portuguese in service before arriving by way of his own island language. His father, Manuel, taught him English in the cradle and Spanish in the womb. And now, from the lingua franca of the Delta, he is translated into the local palaver, "Come back tomorrow." And he sees his patients are puzzled. What means tomorrow? They have no word for the days or weeks or years or even the hours yet to come. They have no concept of the future. What means tomorrow? And in the same world, the numeracy amounts to 1, 2, 3, many, with no numerals beyond 3. They stand naked in the shadow-filtered light, speaking bird, speaking river, speaking fire, darkness, and star time, with so much to teach us and so much to share. Thank you for this opportunity to read that poem. And I'll turn you over to back to Julienne, and she'll be introducing Marty.
Thank you very much, John. That was wonderful. And I'm gonna go ahead and introduce our third guest. So our third guest is Marty Gervais. He is a Canadian poet, a photographer, a journalist, a professor at the University of Windsor, and the publisher of Black Moss Press. Marty has published many books of poetry, including A New Dress Every Day and Nothing More Perfect, both of which were published by Mosaic Press in 2021. And today he joins us from Windsor, Ontario, to share his book called What You Don't See, published by Hidden Brook Press. Please welcome Marty Gervais. And Marty, whenever you get unmuted, you can go ahead and give us a quick little introduction of this book that features not just your poems, but also your photographs.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Julienne. And it's nice to be reading with Richard and John. And this book, What You Don't See, is published by Hidden Brook Press. And it's a book of pictures and poems. And these poems are about photography and creativity. It's about pictures and about people who make them. And it's about the practice of photography. But I think the point is that I've always tried to make is that photography is much the same as poetry. It's the same impulse, the same tools that make images and turn images into stories. And the poem that I'm going to read is called What Makes a Picture. And it's really a poem about creativity. And sometimes how the way we look at the world is a little baffling to those who are actually living through a particular moment and seeing suddenly you stepping into it. And there you are, the poet or the artist standing outside looking in and seeing something symbolic, maybe something mysterious or, I don't know, curious, something about how the story plays out and what you're looking at on the surface looks pretty ordinary. And what I'm talking about is going to the farm that John B. Lee grew up on. And the simplicity of this is going to this farm. The subjects, in my case, and I went along with a photographer from Kentucky, Bob Hill, and the subjects for us were John's father and mother. The subjects for us were the barns, you know, the fences, the outbuildings, the slope of the land, the gate, the veranda of the house, and of course, this farm family, ordinary people whose lives were bound up in this farm that has been there since the days of Noah. But for John's father, there was something more important, and he really didn't get what we were doing, and maybe we didn't get what he was doing, but the jawbone of an ancient mastodon, and that story had been told a million times and been covered in newspapers all over North America, He wanted us to go and take this photograph. And instead, we wanted a real life story, pretty ordinary in a way, but about two people on a farm in southwestern Ontario on a warm day under a blue sky. And he just didn't get it. On the other hand, maybe we didn't. The poem is called What Makes a Picture. Two photographers, a poet and an old farmer, went in search of the jawbone of the giant mastodon that had been unearthed in 1890 on a farm near Highgate. It was on loan to the village's public library, and the farmer hoped his visitors would see it, get a picture before it was taken back to its home in a North Dakota museum. And the farmer knew the farm where it had been dug up, only a mile away, and knew the family, even recalled some of the fuss about the skeleton of this great beast. But the photographers had made this trip to meet the farmer and his wife, and they rode up to the lane to where the tall black barn stood on a hill. And that's what lured the photographers. The barn, the hill, the rolling landscape around Highgate, this family, and the vast sweep of the land and the solitary sun above. They cared nothing for the mastodon. Yet the farmer insisted on pictures of the creature's jawbone dug up among tree roots and rocks in a nearby ditch. Forget the photos of him walking among a mob of sheep or standing with his wife at the gate. Forget the crooked fence or the silent sleeping tractors resting in the shade of the barn. And so the photographer stepped out into that summer day and motored on down into the village to snap pictures of the jawbone of this great beast, but went away puzzled over how nobody mentioned the other creature unearthed with the skeleton, the skull of a giant beaver that had been the size of a black bear with an 8-foot tail and teeth the length of steak knives. Now that would be a picture.
Very nice. That was wonderful. Now, John, I'd like to turn back to you, and I have a question for you, because in the introductions I gave to both Richard and Marty, the two of them both don't just consider themselves writers and poets, but they also consider themselves photographers. So I was wondering if you have any interest in photography yourself, or if you maybe wanted to talk about how you see your poetry. Do you also sort of see these snapshots, the same way Marty does?
I think I have a duty. Description is sacred. I am such a poor photographer. I'm like my mother, who would take photographs of people, and you'd get this or this. You'd get a huge landscape and somebody's forehead. When I was in Israel, and I mean, what a beautiful trip that was. I took one of those new technology cameras, and I took about 200 photographs, and there wasn't a single photograph of any interest at all when I came home. I leave photography to those people who have a real visual sense. I can tell when I look at a photograph by Ty, or I look at a photograph by Marty, or by Bob Hill, who's one that was mentioned, or by Brother Paul Quenin, that they have an eye, and they know what to take, and they know what to leave out. And then when they've taken the photograph, they can see the photograph that is the keeper. But I understand my father's point of view too. That Highgate mastodon that he was talking about is the most complete mastodon skeleton ever found in the history of the world. And it is world famous. It's called the Highgate mastodon, and it was found a kilometer from our farm. And it was the first time that it returned to Highgate, the very first time. And there it was in the village library. And my father did not understand why Marty would want to take a photograph of a paint can with 2 paint brushes stuck in it. I have a copy of that photograph on my shelf, and it's absolutely gorgeous. So to answer your question, my sacred duty is to find words and language that captures a moment in the way that a great photograph does. And it's for other people to say whether I do that, whether I accomplish that. But that's my point of view when it comes to photographs. And if you like, I could read the poem that you suggested I read, because it follows nicely from the poem that Marty read, because it deals with my father and his sensibility. He was a farmer, fourth generation on the farm. I was fifth generation on the farm. And this is a description of my father's fridge, which sat in the back shed, because there was a fridge in the kitchen. This fridge was in the back shed. My father's fridge. My father's fridge sat in the back shed off the kitchen there on cold cement, the smoke smells and straw scents of the men come in from the barn, where the collie dog slept on the hard floor, when the winter howled at the door, or the spikes hammered into the wall, with ardocks for hooks and swill stink of sour water in galvanized pails, and apple scraps, potato peels, and the oleogustus of rancid lard floating in white islands on the surface, small monocles of spoiled fat meant for the hogs in the yard. And what he kept in there mostly, what my mother refused to allow in the house, bad things, the noisome milk rot of Limburger, and blue mold bruised in small cakes, and the sharp clabber of old cheese, and beer gone skunky in squat bottles, medicines blended for worming the sheep, nicotine vermicides and vials for dosing the cattle, yo's milk meant to be warmed for the lambs, orphaned by mastitis and the untimely death of their mothers. And the damn fridge sometimes shorted, so teasing the chromium handle in wet socks would send an unpleasant shiver, a cruel metallic tremor shocking the bones with a warning, noli me tangere. And now it has all vanished, like the plowed under autumn darkness of a midnight field. My father working the land in the late hours, the ghost light of his labor, dimming to nothing, turning away in the distance, come close as he leaves. And that is my father's fridge. And he made an impression on Marty. Marty's written a number of poems about him and a number of people. Robert Hillis has been to the farm. Marianne Mulhern's been to the farm. I don't think, Ty, you've never been to the farm, have you? Just shake your head. You've never been to the farm. It's completely different from what it was when Marty was there. Now the barns are all gone. It's and so that's why I think photography that conserves and preserves, and poetry that conserves and preserves and sacralizes, makes sacred that which used to be, is important. So my father's fridge is as a kind of iconography in my imagination that is sacred, like the relics in a church.
I absolutely agree that poem, the reason I asked you to read it is because it did paint a picture inside of the imagination, and it was quite curious of a poem as well. So Marty, if we could turn back to you before we begin the Q&A from the audience, would you like to speak to that and read your next selection?
Yeah, I've been to the farm. I remember that fridge because long after your father had passed away, John, you and I went back to the farm, and I opened the fridge. I mean, I'm a terrible person. I should never go in someone else's house and open a fridge. But and when my grandchildren do that here, it annoys me. But here I am. I'm just as bad as they are. I opened the fridge, and what did I find in there? I opened the freezer part, and there was a mouse in that freezer, obviously frozen. And I remember you had to take a car scraper, an ice scraper or something like that, and you scraped the mouse free. It was, but I find that the place was so fascinating. But what was really fascinating also, what was fascinating are the details. And your room was like a little museum to John B. Lee of what he was like when he, at the age of 18 went off to the university. He was still You still had some, there was Beatle, memorabilia there. Your desk that you had made was still there. And there's a picture of it somewhere. And it was, but photography has always interested me. And I was lucky to meet a really amazing and well-known legendary photographer by the name of William Allard. And he took this one picture which has to do with farm life, and the poem is about this boy with 2 pieces of bread, and in the background you can see, farm wagon, and what this picture is all about is for me, the whole act of taking a picture, and that is keeping it simple, uncluttered, letting the picture speak for itself. And the hands, the eyes, and the honey on the bread, there's a layer of honey on the bread, the suspenders the boy's wearing. These are a world of details that tell you something of the boy with this cropped haircut. And my way of approaching photography, like poetry, is to let the story unfold in its own direction. And really to be good at looking, at noticing, and to be good at listening, and don't mess it up with all, your own weird life struggles and abstractions. As a photographer and as a poet, as an artist, you let the picture and the moment speak for itself. So here's the poem. And in some ways, it's really a description. No need to scratch your head to figure out his approach to taking pictures. Look at the picture. A boy with 2 pieces of sliced bread in his hands, blousy white shirt tucked into sagging, battered blue jeans, fastened up with suspenders. A buckboard wagon and a field of yellow wheat just beyond. It's the eyes you finally see, serious, fierce, an ordinary day. And you turn back to those rough, large hands, how delicate and carefully they are handling these 2 pieces of bread lathered with honey. Plain and simple. And that's how it's done.
Thank you, Marty. Very nice. So if anyone has a question, you can go ahead and unmute yourself right now and ask the question. I'll wait a couple seconds, or else I actually have a question for Richard. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and ask Richard a question, and if anyone else has a question, you can feel free to type it into the chat and I can read it for you if you're uncomfortable with unmuting yourself. But Richard, we just heard Marty and John both sort of comment about photography. And I know in your book, there's some really beautiful images. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I think that actually photography was my first muse. I started taking photographs when I was about 13 with my father's help. I bought my first single lens reflex camera. He told me that if I saved enough for the first half, he would fill in and we would purchase a camera. So he and I went off and investigated cameras, and I have been taking photographs ever since. And I've had my photographs in dozens of books, and I jokingly say that I have my photographs on the cover of more books than any other Canadian poet. But that's because I'm a photographer and a publisher, so I have the privilege of putting my pictures on the covers. But I do see my poems, and where I was noticing when John was reading his poem that there was an awful lot more about smell in his poem than I put into my poems. I smelled the cheese in that fridge, and I really appreciated it. But the mouse was a little bit too frozen for me to smell. I'm still conjuring up why on earth the mouse was there. My mother opened up the freezer one time and found an owl in our fridge, but that was because my father found it dead in the backyard and he took it off to a taxidermist and he didn't want it to rot. So, but the mouse, I might have to write a poem about that mouse. But I do see, I see my poems. I'm going to read just a very short poem. It's three lines. It's not meant to be a haiku. I don't follow haiku rules particularly, but this poem is also about Cuba. And John and I have a very dear friend in Cuba, in Ibarra. Jorge is our friend, and his wife Michelle, and they have a son. The son's nickname is Wampy, and Wampy has pigeons. So this short poem is a photograph, in a sense, about Michelle's kitchen, and that's the title of the poem. Michelle's kitchen. A flutter of white doves scour the tile floor, pecking invisible crumbs. So they have a gray floor, and I didn't mention that in the poem, but the white doves, really they're pigeons, but I turned them into doves. They roam the kitchen, and I just found that photograph of the pigeons. I in fact I took a picture of the pigeons on the floor. And when I got back to Canada, I was combing through all of my photographs, and I saw the picture of the pigeons, the white doves on the floor in the kitchen, and hence that short poem.
Thank you for that, Richard. We actually have a couple of questions coming in. So we do have a question from Robert Hillis that I'll read in just a second. But one of our audience members would like to ask a question. So Jack, if you would like to unmute and go ahead and ask.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Well, I just want to say, Marty, I actually really liked your poem. I thought it was very well written. I'm just starting out in this. I'm only 15, so I'm kind of young. I'm an early starter, but I just kind of like how do you like structure your poems? Because I'm kind of struggling mine a little bit with that.
Well, I mean, I think you have to be honest with yourself, and I think in terms of the actual structure, you have to find a way to tell it in your own voice. And you shouldn't. Initially, I would say, don't worry at this point about rules. Just write your story down. Write whatever you're wanting to say.
Because I wrote one about my family.
Mhm.
Because family is really big to me. So
Yeah. Good.
yeah.
Well, and so, I think that, write about what you know is so important. And I think that's, that way it becomes, that way when someone hears it or sees it, it's honest. It's a true representation of how you feel. But, what every poet needs and what every writer needs, and it doesn't matter whether you're Stephen King or Margaret Atwood, you need an editor. And the editor will look at the work and see exactly whether it's honest, whether it actually succeeds in conveying whatever emotion or whatever feeling you have, or what your perspective is, and help you, move from there to making it maybe better. John, you might want to work on this too.
And poems could be any length, right? They could be like short poems or longer poems, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the William Wordsworth wrote the Prelude. It was hundreds of pages, so it's yeah. It doesn't have
Wow.
There's no specific length.
Yeah, because I've just been writing kind of like smaller ones because I'm just getting into it. So
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good that you're doing that.
Yeah,
Marty, this. Oh, you can go ahead and comment, Ty, if you'd like.
Oh, I just, Jack, sometimes if I'm struggling with, I know that I want to write a poem about a specific topic. Sometimes I just start writing words. Don't worry about forming a poem. Just get some words down onto paper so that you don't lose them. I lose words very easily. So get some words down onto paper. I often start my writing process in prose, just long linear lines that just are not, and then a poem sometimes evolves out of those words, and you start to find the poem in those words.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just kind of still new to it. So, I mean, I have been doing that. I've just been writing down stuff that's kind of like, it just comes to me in my notes, like in my phone, so I don't forget. I literally have it up right now. I mean, that's
amazing. Well, Jack, you're definitely in the right place. So definitely, if you keep yourself in this writing circle, in the writing community, you'll definitely learn something from these very talented Canadian poets. So I'm gonna move
my
on.
grandpa was a writer, so it's
Wonderful.
Cool.
Are you living in Windsor?
Yes.
Oh, great. Well, we can talk about this a little bit more, but I'd like to move on for just a quick second and ask one more question. And then we can continue on maybe with, if we have time, with one more reading from each of our authors. But Robert Hillis asked a question, and maybe we can ask this one to John, but Richard and Marty, you can also definitely give us your thoughts, because he'd like to know if there's any specific poets that influenced your writing.
Well, this actually follows nicely from Jack's question. If you think about making a poem as making something, and you ask yourself, well, if I was making a chair, what would I do? I would go and look at a lot of chairs and see what other people had done to make chairs. And then I would just make a whole series of chairs and discover my own chairishness. And the same thing is true of poetry. You learn to write poetry by reading poetry, reading a lot of poetry, seeing how other people make poetry, and then you make your own, and you make it, and you make it, and eventually you'll have a chair worth sitting on. And that follows nicely to Robert's question about poets, the list that have influenced us. The list, in my case, is really, really long, and it's always growing. I don't have any anxiety about being influenced by other poets, because eventually you realize that you are a snowflake. You are different from everybody else who's ever existed, just as every snowflake is different from every snowflake before it. But the poets that I discovered when I was about 16, about 15 or 16, which I think Jack said he was a teenager. Dylan Thomas was the first poet that I discovered that really made me say, wow, I want to do that. And then the list goes on from there, and it just goes on and on. I mean, Robert is a fine poet, and he's influenced me. Marty has influenced me. Ty has influenced me. And people who do what they do, and they do it well, just make you want to just keep doing it. Any poet that you read that makes you want to do, I want to do that thing that they're doing. And then you discover that you are unique, you do it differently than anybody who ever came before you. So that's my answer to your question, and I'll turn you over to the other folks and hear what Richard and Marty have to say.
Certainly following through with what John's saying about read poems, read. I'm reading a collection of Rumi's poems, and surprisingly, I found some influence in his poems, and I'm writing a series of poems with my friend Jorge about animals that speak, and they have dialogue back and forth, and somewhat they are geared towards children. But interestingly, I was reading Rumi's poems late at night last night, and there was a dialogue popped up between a mouse and a camel, and in Rumi's poem. And I thought, oh, isn't that wonderful? And it caused me to jot down an idea and then move on. And I'll give credit to Rumi. I don't want him rolling in his grave. So that's how we're influenced. And so just keep reading and keep on writing.
Yeah, for me, poetry came alive when I was in grade 9, and I've told the story before. I was going into high school. I said to one of my older brothers, my older brother Bill, I said, "So what happens when I go to high school?" And he said, "Well, you'll be taking 3 languages." And I said, "Okay, what languages?" He said, "Well, you're going to be taking French, Latin, and Shakespeare." And I said, "What the hell is Shakespeare?" And he said, "Well, you're going to find out. You won't be able to understand that language at all." So in grade 9, I'm sitting at the back of the room, and we opened up Twelfth Night, and I absolutely fell in love with the language. I fell in love with that play. Still one of my favorite plays. And but what I really fell in love with were the Dark Lady Sonnets by William Shakespeare, and they were in an anthology that we had, and I still have that anthology here. And I went home just swooning over this guy Shakespeare, and I thought that's what I want to be when I grow up. I want to be William Shakespeare, and
you became him.
Yeah, exactly. I just called Marty though. But it was just falling in love with the language, and falling in love with the stories that Shakespeare was telling, and there's stories that live today in so many ways. I mean, I remember taking my son Andre to play. We went to see Macbeth in Stratford, and he was in elementary school. We were riding our bicycles, and he was more interested in hockey and riding his bicycle than watching Shakespeare. But I said, "You're going to love this," and I told him all about it. Told him about the witches and what to look for, and about the jealousy that was going on. And he came out and he looked very worried. And I said, "What's going on? Like, what are you thinking about right now?" And he says, "Well, Dad, that's so much like Miami Vice," which was a television program on. And I said, "Oh my God, it is." All this intrigue in the background, people being jealous of one another and trying to do away with people. All the corruption that was going on. It was all there. So Shakespeare was very much alive, even on TV programs today.
Anyway, thank you to all of our poets for joining us tonight. This was a really great reading, despite our technical difficulties here at the end. And I really appreciate the 3 of you working with me to put on this event. So thank you so much. And for any of the viewers here tonight that did want to purchase books, you can visit either our Black Moss Press website at www.blackmosspress.com, or Marty's book is available at Hidden Brooks.
Hiddenbrookpress.com. Yep.
Okay, perfect. So anyone here tonight looking to purchase books, you can purchase them at those 2 locations. And thanks for everyone who had questions. Like I said, it's always wonderful to hear poets reading their poetry, and it's even more special to hear them give advice to the future writers out there. So thanks again, and have a wonderful night, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
Julie.
you, everyone. Thanks
so
everyone for
much.
turning up, and thanks, Julienne, for what you did on our behalf. Much appreciated.